407 grains ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new steel conceived in a vacuum arc furnace and dedicated to the proposition that all alloys are not created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that steel, or any ferrous alloy so tough and so ductile, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that TTT diagram. We have come to dedicate a portion of that diagram as a final resting place for those alloys who here gave their carbon that that steel might harden. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But, in a larger sense, we cannot cold work, we cannot through harden, we cannot hallow this steel. The brave carbides, living and dissolved, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract carbon. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what we did here. It is for us the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who hardened here have thus so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dissolved we take increased hardenability to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of carbide formation. That we here highly resolve that these dissolved shall not have dissolved in vain, that this steel, under Gibbs, shall have a new birth of hardenability, and that metallurgy of the steel, by the steel, for the steel, shall not soften from this earth. Alloying elements, you are free to form carbides. Chromium,
Chromium! Chromium!
molybdenum,
Molybdenum!
nickel,
Nickel!
Hooray! In Dixie land, I took my stand in it and died in Dixie. Away, away, away down south to Dixie. Away.
There is a distinct difference between hardness and hardenability. Hardness is related to resistance and deformation, while hardenability describes the depth to which a material can be hardened. For example, steels which have an exact same hardenability can have vastly different hardness values depending on their thermal processing.
Steel is an alloy consisting of primarily iron, with small additions of carbon and other elements. There are many different solid phases present in steel. An example of a phase of water is ice.
This diagram shows different phases present in steel as a function of composition and temperature.
Austenite is a high-temperature solid phase of steel.
Ferrite is a lower temperature phase of steel.
For our purposes, the steel is cooled quickly from high temperature to low temperature. By cooling quickly, the steel can also form another phase called martensite. Martensite phase is the hardest phase in steel. By increasing hardenability, martensite can be formed more readily.
Factors that affect the hardenability of steel include carbon content, alloying element content, and grain size.
Increasing carbon content in steels leads to higher hardenability.
Alloying elements such as manganese, chromium, molybdenum, nickel are added in small amounts to allow the change from austenite to martensite to take place with slower cooling rates.
Larger grain sizes are also better for increased hardenability.
Increased hardenability is desirable for many applications. Steel transfers heat poorly, so it is difficult to cool the core of large parts quickly. Higher hardenabilities allow for larger parts to be transformed into martensite because the cooling rate towards the center can be slower. High hardenabilities also allow the same size parts to be cooled slower and still form martensite. Cooling slower is gentler and results in less distortion.
1040 steel is a plain carbon steel, while 4140 is an alloy steel. Both steels have the same carbon content of 0.4%. The 4140 has additions of chromium and molybdenum. Therefore, the only change in hardenability is a result of alloying additions.
As seen in this plot of hardness versus distance across a steel bar, the 1040 steel shows a drop in hardness, while the 4140 steel remains hard throughout the entire cross-section. Both steels cooled the same way. This shows that the addition of alloying elements in the 4140 increased the hardenability.
The knife was too soft to kill Lincoln. We need to harden it. Quenching should do this.
This hardened steel should do the trick.
Oh.
The Confederacy lives on!
Victory land of the fight and to defend our victory. Away, away, away down south to victory. Away, away, away down south to victory. Oh, Mrs. Mary will...
Steel. Think about it.